Welcome there, Year 10. Welcome to another wonderful Wednesday of language learning. Remember, if you want to join in the live lesson, we have that today at 1:45 till probably about 2:15, about half an hour, if you would prefer to go through this live in a lesson format instead of just listening to me waffling on this video. So the steps for our learning journey today are on the screens there. We're going to have a focus on some vocabulary that may be new to some of you, may be familiar. We're going to revise the tools and techniques to use by writers. By tools and techniques we mean subject terminology, things that the writers specifically chosen to create intended effects. And we're going to look at a very small extract from the 19th century, and we're going to look at a question of how the writer has created a certain effect in their description by using the tools and techniques that we have focused on today. Oh, I can't click my slide on. This is a good start. There we go. So I just want to recap what we mean by analysis, and that little icon there on the top right of the screen. When you see that, I want you to know that I'm needing you to analyse something. And if you can analyse something, it means that you move away from just spotting something. So you're no longer like that chap there putting on the binoculars and searching, for retrieving, looking for, spotting words. You are becoming critical readers, and you're assessing the way that language, that words have been used in order to persuade the reader of a particular viewpoint. So when we are analysing, we're looking both at words and we're looking at the structure, and we're looking at how the writer has used those to create a particular viewpoint. And I want you to imagine that you're that person at the top there giving a lesson to the examiners that are reading it. You are explaining and interpreting and looking at detail of how those particular word choices have created an intended effect. So you're moving away from spotting to actually going into a bit more detail. So we're going to just do a quick vocabulary check for the extract that we're looking at today. Like I say, some of you are possibly familiar with lots of these words, some of you will find them completely new. When you're given a 19th century text to look at, you may find, like on this screen here, quite a number of words that you don't recognise. If that's the case, don't get stuck and hung up and intimidated by those words. You can still decipher some meaning by looking at where the word sits within a sentence. Maybe read the sentence before and the sentence after and try and work out what that particular word means. But don't let it stop you when you are presented with something and you haven't got a teacher there to help you. But that's why we keep exposing you to as many different texts as we can with as many different words in, so that we can make sure that you are equipped with as much vocabulary as possible to reduce the chances of you being in the exam with words that you don't recognise. So let's just start with the top left there, shrouds. If you shroud something, you are covering it with a cloth, and shrouds are predominantly used to describe when you wrap a dead body for burial. So we call them death shrouds. And there is a lady preparing some shrouds there so that they're filled with herbs and nice smelling flowers and petals, so that when the body is enshrouded in it, it's got that kind of preserve and embalming and nice smell. That's just part of that particular lady's ritual. But shrouds are just the cloths that you wrap up bodies in. And along the same theme of shrouds, if we move over here to this rather odd looking lady wearing a veil. Now, we are used to veils in weddings. A veil is a face covering. It's the idea of covering something with a fabric, but you can see through it. It's not completely opaque, it's translucent. You can just about see through it a little bit. So shrouds and veils, both materials, both you can associate with funerals and death there. Now the lady on the top right, I have used this image to talk about two words actually. If you hear someone being described as having a wan complexion, as looking a bit wan, it means very pale. It's not a positive description for someone, it means pasty. They're not well, they're unwell, they're wan. So that's to do with the actual skin itself, with the complexion. And then that word underneath, sombre, is feeling sad. If you're sombre, you're feeling very melancholy and you're low. She's looking very sombre. There is a theme here, isn't there, with the shrouds and the veil and the wan and the sombre. Got to have an emoji, got a little angry emoji there. If you are described as being cantankerous, it means you are angry and you're cross. So cantankerous is a feeling, sombre is a feeling, wan is a description for a complexion. Veil, that's the noun of that object there. Shrouds, there's your noun of that object there. This image here, this charcoal sketch, anguish. Anguish is another feeling. Again, like cantankerous, cantankerous is an extreme feeling, a very strong emotion of anger. Anguish is also a very extreme feeling, a negative one of utter despair and being overwhelmed with sadness. It's almost quite frantic. Anguish is more sad than cantankerous. Cantankerous is quite angry and cross. Anguish, it comes with that idea of despair and just feeling utterly lost. Sepulchral, 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 sepulchral. I don't know how to say it properly. Sepulchral, sepulchral, sepulchral. Honestly, for those of you who don't know, I'm quite dyslexic and it really trips me up sometimes. Sepulchral. It's that there. It's a type of tomb. It's got, that one there is very ornate and it's found within a church or a cathedral. It's where the body would be buried within it. And that final image on the bottom left there, necropolis. Now that particular necropolis is in Glasgow, and I have been there. And a necropolis, it's a place for burial, a bit like a graveyard, if you like, or a cemetery, but it doesn't necessarily have to be associated to a church. It's hallowed ground, but it could be in a slightly separate place. But necropolises are usually full of more ornate tombs and these bigger tombs that would encase these sepulchral burial chambers here. So overall, they are pretty negative, these new words that you have got associated with the theme of death. Now there's one last one, of spleen, and there's two ways of looking at this. Literally, your spleen is part of your anatomy there, and it helps with your digestion, and it's connected to your stomach, and it is full of bile and bilious liquid. And those of you that are studying history will know that when we talk of being good spleened, back in a long, many days ago, it meant to be good-hearted or compassionate. If you're described as being too spleen-like or spleeny, you are very cross, you're cantankerous, you're unhappy, you're hysterical, and you're irritable. And it's to do with them believing that that bilious, that bile, that acidic, too much, an excess of it led you to feeling not very well at all. So the word spleen comes from the ancient Greek of splen, and it's the way we talk about the heart as having different feelings, positive feelings and negative feelings. Same is believed in with the spleen. The French refer to it as if you're pensive or you're sad or you're melancholy. And this idea of the connection between the organs and your temperament comes from the humoral medicine of the ancient Greeks and the sort of 4 humours that some of you would have or will be studying in history. Okay, so 4 images on the screen there. What do you notice? What can you see? I'm hoping some of you are able to tell me the city at least. You'll spot the very gothic, spiky tops of Big Ben. Some of you will notice Westminster Bridge. Some of you will see the very tall chimneys of Battersea Power Station. And there's another view there of Battersea Power Station with all the houses just by it. We are looking at London, and hopefully you'll notice that this is London during a smog, and I'm sure quite a few of you know what a smog is. And a smog is when there is a combination, a lethal combination of pollution that is coming as a result of the industrialisation, the Industrial Revolution, of all the manufacturing and the burning of the fossil fuels and the coals. You can see that belching and billowing out of those chimneys there. And it will combine with the fogs. And as a result of the fog and the smoke coming together, it makes a smog. It hangs in the air and it is quite toxic and can lead to not only poor visibility but incredibly ill health. The extract we're going to be looking at today is that of a French woman, Flora Tristan, and she visits London in 1839, and we're going to look at what she noticed about London during one of its smogs. And we're going to look at how she writes about London and the types of things she's trying to persuade the reader to feel about London when she is describing it through her own experiences. So we're going to look at language, and we're going to look at the structure, and we're going to look at them beyond the just spotting it, putting your binoculars on and inferring and deducing. We're analysing, we're going that one step further and describing the effect of these tools and techniques on the readers. And the 3 icons at the bottom, the eyes there, the noticing eyes, we've looked at those in the previous 2 weeks. They're to do with noticing. It could be adjectives, it could be images, things that the writer sees and is describing to the reader to help us see it in our mind's eye as well. The heart there is to do with feelings, and we looked at feelings last week and how the writer evokes and creates feelings. And we're going to look at what the writer, I can't remember her name now, Flora. We're going to look at what Flora notices and the feelings that she is created from her visit to London. And we've also looked at repetition. That's what on and on and on and on. That's what that icon means there. So we've looked at those before. I'm going to introduce you to these 3 new icons at the top, although the ideas are the same. Some of you may have already noticed that this here is a picture of a sea. It's a wave and it's got a face in it, and that's personification. Personification is when you are giving inanimate objects human-like qualities. So here we have the sea with a face. And here we've got a type of personification, but it's not as pathetic fallacy. And we actually looked at that last week a little bit. It's where the weather is being used to replicate the mood of a piece. And then here we are looking at metaphors and the idea of just umbrellas encompassing and being something else. So we've got the symbol of metaphor there. Oh, there we are, there's the words. Okay, this is the extract, that's it in its entirety, and we're going to notice where you spot personification, pathetic fallacy, metaphor, any noticing things you see, feelings and repetition. You can just sit and listen because I will guide you through these. You don't have to do anything else but listen. But if you actively spot any of those, good for you. Sorry, just taking a sip of my water there. Above the monster city, a dense fog combines with the volume of smoke and soot belching from thousands of chimneys to wrap London in a black cloud, which allows only the dimmest light to penetrate and shrouds everything in a funeral veil. In London, misery is in the very air you breathe and enters in at every pore. There is nothing more gloomy or disquieting than the aspect of the city on a day of fog or rain or black frost. Only succumb to its influence and your head becomes painfully heavy, your digestion sluggish, your breathing laboured for lack of fresh air, and your whole body is overcome by fatigue. Then you are in the grip of what the English call spleen, a profound despair, unaccountable anguish, cantankerous hatred for those one loves the best, disgust with everything, and an irresistible desire to end one's life by suicide. On days like this, London has a terrifying face. You seem to be lost in the necropolis of the world, breathing in its sepulchral air. The light is wan, the cold humid, the long rows of identical, sombre houses, each with its black iron grilles and narrow windows, resembles nothing so much as tombs stretching to infinity, whilst between them wander corpses awaiting the hour of burial. Happy little piece, isn't it? So imagine you're presented with that. Basic thing, is it positive or is it negative? And I think we can all agree that this is definitely on the negative side of the street. This has not been a positive experience for our Flora. And how do we know that? By the tools and techniques she has used. So, we have got Monster City and London has a terrifying face that I have spotted there and I have put in bold. Monster City. The city has been personified as if it is a monster. There are connotations of the word monster. Monster, literally out of the dictionary, a noun, a large, ugly and frightening imaginary creature, a thing of extraordinary or daunting size. So it may be that the writer's talking about the size of the city, but also it might be because it's quite ugly and frightening. I had to leave the verb on there because I've never heard monster as a verb. My mum used to monster me for coming home so late. I had to say it in a slightly Cockney accent there. oh, Mrs. Mary's going to well monster me for not handing my work in. Anywho, so we have personification of the monster there, the monster city. It's not literally a monster, it's monstrous. You could argue that is a metaphor, monster city. And then you have London has a terrifying face. That's definitely personified because it's given human-like qualities. So I'm arguing myself that monster city there, above the monster city, with the terrifying face, the interpretation of monster is that it's just vast and huge. But I can't get away from that idea that monster's also an attribute. It's quite monstrous in its behaviour. If when it comes to a description like this, where you almost convince yourself you're not convinced, like I just have, then don't refer to that as personification. You could just say that the writer has referred to the city as monstrous, a monster city that has got connotations of being ugly, menacing, frightening. But I know for a fact that London having a terrifying face is personification, so I'm going to talk about that. A terrifying face is looking you in the eyes, and it's like you could be lost in that necropolis. Pretty sinister stuff. So we have got personification being used with London being quite terrifying. The effect is she's having quite a horrible ordeal. It is unknown, it's unpredictable, and we've got the minus, the negative side there. The writer's effect is negative intent. It was a bad experience of London. So we've already talked about the city itself as being a monster, but we've also got the weather. They talk about the fog. The city is covered in fog or a rain or black frost, and they say that you can succumb to its influence. So the fog here is being used in a way that is really negative, that it can influence you. And the difference between pathetic fallacy and personification is that they differ in their function. So pathetic fallacy is a kind of personification. Personification gives human emotions to inanimate objects of nature. For example, referring to the weather. Oh my gosh, sorry. It's been a long old day. Got to start again. Pathetic fallacy is a type of personification, but it refers to the weather, specifically reflecting a mood. There is an intended effect of feeling. Personification is a broader term and could be about anything. So the sea's gaping mouth with menace there is personification about the sea. But here, if you're talking about the fog moving in a way that if you succumb to its intent and its want, that is the weather specifically. So therefore it is pathetic fallacy. And the writer is talking about the fog as having this powerful force, making the inhabitants succumb. It's almost like they are a victim. It's got so much power, it's influencing their head, it's physically affecting them because their head becomes painfully heavy and your digestion sluggish and your breathing is laboured for lack of fresh air and your whole body is overcome by fatigue. So the fog is having a physical effect on the person, but also an emotional effect. The despair, the anguish, the cantankerous hatred for those one loves the best, disgust with everything, and leading to inevitably wanting suicide. That's incredibly dramatic. So they are using pathetic fallacy to show that the fog is such a powerful force that it is having a profound effect on her and the inhabitants. So we've gone beyond just saying personification is used. We've said it's used to describe the fog and the effect that the fog has on the writer. And you can talk about how the city is personified. So we have the city down here. So the writer talks about the city, and then you can look at how she layers the description of the city. So you've got the city, but then we have got the fog plus the smog, which leads to despair. And although the fog and the smoke creating the smog is laying low, it's not that much higher than the city. It will envelop the people around it. It still is that little bit higher, but she's layering those negative descriptions about the city to make sure that the reader is left no mistake that a negative and suffocating mood, this negative tone is being created, that London, due to its awful air quality, because of the fog and the smoke leading to smog, is making her feel like she cannot breathe. She is in utter despair, and the overall feeling is that of negative. Something else is the feelings. So although the writer is focusing on describing London and the fog and the smoke and the air quality, the effect this has on her and the inhabitants are those words that you can see on the right. She describes gloomy, misery, disquieting, despair, hatred, anguish, disgust, suicide. All those emotions, those emotive words, those negative emotive words are being used to describe how they feel. If you notice a collection of words on a similar theme, and it's often verbs usually, the verbs are usually the ones that are used in increasing impact, but in this case it's the feelings. Consider how you could rank them. This is a shadometer. I know you probably think I've gone mad, but this is a shadometer. This is where you think of not that effective. You know, this is the negative side, this is the positive side. We can agree these are definitely all on the negative side. These are all negative descriptions. The ones that aren't as impactive, aren't as strong, would go down there, and with increasing intensities we go up. So these are all synonyms of the same negative feelings. I would probably put gloomy down the bottom, gloomy, misery, despair, and anguish. I'd possibly have anguish leading to despair. Disquieting I'll probably have down the bottom. I think suicide I'd put right up there at the top. That's pretty serious. That's quite an extreme emotion. Here is how they are ordered in the text. So if we track through the text chronologically the types of feeling words, the emotive words, the emotion words that are being used to describe, they start with gloomy. And gloomy is a bit glum, atmosphere is a bit gloomy, disquieting, nothing too drastic, to despair, to misery, to anguish, to disgust, to hatred, to suicide. I know that shadometer is a lot on the eyes, but can you see, if you work out which side of the street these words are sitting on, are they negative or are they positive? This is definitely negative. This was not a positive experience. And look at how they, as we go through the text, they become more intensely negative. The impact actually is quite serious at the end. And you can do this with any words. You can do this with the verbs, like I say, the senses that are being described. So there's the text as a whole, and you can see that I have put these words in bold so you can see how they track through the text. Now the purpose of this isn't for me to sound like I've gone completely mad, is to remind you how to analyse a text, and that means just look beyond the first initial layer, look for metaphorical or symbolic meanings, look for the intended meanings on the reader. We're looking at the effects of the pollution, of the fog, of the smog, and the feelings that are evoked, and they're being described with increasing intensity, negative effect. This was not a positive trip to London. Here we're going to spot some metaphors, and there is this extended metaphor of London being the necropolis of the world. It is the pit of despair. When you visit London, you become lost in the necropolis of the world. Breathing in its sepulchral air, it's like you are within a tomb surrounded by the death of the undead. You can see, if we start at the top, the words black, shrouds, funeral veil, necropolis, sepulchral, sombre, tombs, corpses, hour of burial. So I have spotted those words there, and the extended metaphor of the city itself being a necropolis. What is the effect on the reader is what you would look for, and it's that idea that you're inevitably going to die when you go there. Now, just because I have spotted metaphors or the emotions that she's feeling there, or the pathetic fallacy or personification, doesn't mean that's all that there is to spot. It's up to you to practice and see what you notice. When you read through, you might have looked at the contrasting descriptions that the writer used of dark and light, smoke, soot, dimmest, light, black, shrouds, gloomy, light, black. If you spot that, what is the effect of it? Why has the writer decided to use these references to dark and light when describing London for the first time? You may notice the repetition of air, the word air that the writer references. Air you breathe. You're breathing, laboured for lack of fresh air, the sepulchral air. You maybe talk about the repetition of air or the lack of, which emphasises the poor air quality that they were experiencing. So please don't feel limited into only looking for the things that I flag up or that you think you should be spotting. If you notice anything, then you can talk about that. So just remember, we're looking at taking you from beyond just spotting to analysing the words. So your job as a critical reader in these non-fiction texts is to assess the way that language is used in order to persuade the reader of a particular viewpoint or effect. And we look at the language, we look at the word choices, and we look at the structure. And you may start your sentences when you respond to these texts along the lines of, the writer has repeated the description of the air to emphasise the lack of clean air that there was. Oh, look at that. Proofread your work, year 10. That's the wrong there. That's awful. Should be There. E-R-E. This adds to a sense of suffocation. If you were looking at the vivid and dark imagery, you might say the writer has used vivid and dark imagery to emphasise the depressing nature of the smog. So just go from the spotting to analysing. This is your task today, okay? and I'm just going to talk you through your task, and then we'll show you the stretch and challenge version as well, okay? And they're both the same thing basically. Very similar to what you looked at last week. You are going to focus on the question, and that is, how does the author use language here to describe the pollution in London? So the question specifically is asking about pollution. When I started typing up the answer to this as an example for you, and it's been a long old day of tutor calls, I was focusing on London. I'd misread the question. You should focus really on the question and reread it. Pollution in London. So you need to choose 3 things that you identify. First of all, what do you feel confident talking about? And that's your choice. You need to make that decision, okay? Then you are going to answer the what, how, why questions based on each one of those things you've identified. So what is the writer trying to say about pollution in London? How has the writer used those words to convey that idea, and why do you think the writer has done this? So I've said the pollution in London is monstrous, both in its effect on the landscape and the environment. London is a graveyard. These are my notes. They're not full sentences. It has a profound negative effect on her that she directly compares the emotions evoked to that craving suicide to escape its clutches. It makes her miserable. So that's my point that I'm trying to make. The 3 things I'm going to talk about are going to be the extended metaphor of London being like a graveyard and death. And you can see I've actually put those in bold there on that side. I'm going to talk about the pathetic fallacy of the fog, that it succumbs you can't escape its clutches, that the fog itself is suffocating you, and the increasingly negative emotions to emphasise the despair that she feels. And why? Well, I think Flora Tristan wants to emphasise the misery of London that is created by both the weather and the landscape of the factories. So your task is to have a go at writing your own notes about the what, how and why, and you can do it just on the box. You can fill in the box if you want to, or you could just do it in note form, but just respond however you want really about how has the author used language to describe London. Choose 3 things that you've identified to talk about and why you think they have done that, and you can just do it in note form. Those of you that want pushing on a bit, and there's quite a few of you out there, you can have a go at creating it into a more, more cohesive paragraph. This is just one paragraph. Those of you that stretch and challenge further, you can do a full, there'll be another one in addition to this for a full answer. How does the author use language here to describe the pollution in London? So there is my answer in the middle, which I'll read you in a moment, but you will see around the outside is the sort of things you should include in an example answer. You should have short embedded quotations. If you're aiming for 10 marks, which we are, this is a 10-mark question usually, you want around 6 or 7 short quotations. You need to analyse the language. You also need to talk about the form or structure. Remember, form could be that it's recount or a diary, first person narrative. The structure could be repetition. How does it start? How does it finish? Your answer should have a clear focus on the point or the question. It should include subject terminology. They're your tools and techniques that the writer uses. And for the top marks, you want to develop your point beyond just the literal or offer alternative interpretations. So I'll read you my answer. Again, this is not completely top of the pops. I've done this after an incredibly long day of tutor calls. I love my tutor group, but it's been, lovely chatting to all the parents. Genuinely lovely actually, but it's just draining. So you're probably find that this answer is riddled with errors. I'm waffling, I'm going to shut up. Right, how does the author use language here to describe the pollution in London? In the extract, the author presents the pollution in as being in collusion with the weather to create as much misery on the inhabitants as possible. In fact, it has turned London itself into a monster that is no longer recognisable. The writer alludes to death and macabre imagery throughout the description, in addition to the suffocating use of pathetic fallacy, leading the reader, no doubt, should be leaving the reader, always proofread your work, Year 10, leaving the reader no doubt that they would inevitably feel driven to suicide themselves if they stayed too long in the polluted city. In fact, the metaphorical image of the city housing its inhabitants, look at that, that's the wrong its, boop, boop, its inhabitants as a necropolis with the dead is developed. What? In fact, the metaphorical image of their city housing its inhabitants as a necropolis with the dead is developed throughout the extract, with the semantic field associated with funerals. The fog and smoke is likened to a funeral veil and shroud, emphasising not only a sinister tone created by the smog, but also hints at the feelings of loss or mourning the writer may have been feeling for her home country of France. The funeral imagery continues throughout the extract, with the final word in fact being burial, as if emphasising the outcome that this city will have on visitors. The pollution is so bad it will kill you. Do you know what? Can you see how, although that is a half decent answer, how difficult it is to read when it's not grammatically correct? It actually makes you jar. And you know, when we go on and on at you about proofread your work, that's why. That's why. So although I think, oh gosh, I really should delete this video and start again, I think it's important that you see the effect it can have if you, the examiner, you go down in their esteem a little bit. You think, oh, they couldn't be bothered to proofread it. They've used the wrong it. I know which it should be. It's not that one. That analysis there with the dead is developed. That just, you tripped over it, so you lost the meaning. Anyway, I'm waffling on. The point is this a half decent answer? Well, let's have a look where we've used these things. That's quite scary, but it's the only way I could get the highlighting to work. Have I used short embedded quotations? Yes, I have. Misery, monster, suicide, necropolis, funeral veil, shroud. Didn't use the quotation marks there for burial, but yes, I have. Have I analysed language? Yes, but not as well as I could have done, I don't think. I talked about the fact London itself is a monster. You feel driven to suicide, feeling of loss, feeling of mourning, emphasise that the city will kill you. Have I talked about the form and structure? Yes. I talk about the semantic field, which is the collection of words on a linked theme to the funerals, and I talk about the fact that continues through the extract and that final word being burial, as if that's the final outcome that this is going to have on you. You're going to die. The pollution is so bad it will kill you. Is there a clear focus on the question? Yes, I mentioned pollution at the beginning, mention it again in the middle, talk about fog and smog here, and mention it at the bottom. Do I talk about subject terminology? Yes. Imagery, pathetic fallacy, metaphorical tone. Do I develop an answer? I do. I talk about feeling of loss, and then I talk about how the writer may have been feeling, you know, that loss for her home country. So although, let's get off that shouty page there, although it was a bit clunky because I hadn't proofread it, I did what I was meant to do. That is the success criteria that you have probably seen before, or you were used to. I know you certainly saw that in school last week. 6 to 8 pieces of relevant information, range of evidence, short embedded quotations, track the text beginning, middle and end, going one step further. I'm not going to stress about self-assessment and exam criteria at the moment. That's just for those of you that want to. So have a look. How does the writer use language to describe pollution in London? What are they trying to say? What tools and techniques have they used? Why have they done that? What is the overall impact? Have a go at that in your notes. It is non-submission week. I know it's non-submission week, but if you want to submit your work to your English teacher, they will be delighted to mark it, because they haven't done a lot of language marking at the moment and they really would like to. So if you want to hand in your language analysis, please do, but we won't be chasing you up for it. Have a lovely day. Thank